After my parents passed away, my own brother kicked me out of our childhood home. At the will, reading a week later, he mocked me in front of the entire family. He told me he hoped I would enjoy being homeless because he made sure I would get absolutely nothing. But then the lawyer cleared his throat and said there was a final section to read. When the lawyer announced my actual net worth to the room, my brother literally fainted on the floor. My name is Naomi. I am 32 years old, and today I buried my parents. Before I share exactly how I destroyed my brother's perfect life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of the family who ended up having the last laugh. The rain was coming down in thick, freezing sheets, soaking right through the black silk of my funeral dress. We had just lowered my parents into the ground at the cemetery less than 4 hours ago. I was standing on the wet grass of our sprawling family estate in Buckhead, shivering while the people who were supposed to be my family looked down at me from the dry-covered porch. Chloe, my 33-year-old sister-in-law, stood near the grand double doors. She was holding a large crystal glass of Chardonnay, her blonde hair perfectly blown out despite the humid Atlanta weather. She looked down at me with a smile that was entirely too bright for a day of mourning. Without missing a beat, she lifted her foot and casually kicked my leather overnight bag right off the top step. I watched it tumble down and land heavily in a muddy puddle at my feet. "Marcus says, this is our house now, Naomi," Chloe said, taking a slow sip of her wine. "We just do not have the space for you anymore. You Spelman dropouts really need to learn some independence at some point. Maybe you can go back to doing hair in a basement somewhere. Just call an Uber and figure it out." Her voice dripped with that sweet, condescending tone she always used when she wanted to insult me under the guise of being helpful. It was the same tone she used at family dinners when she would comment on how loud my natural hair was or how aggressive my business suits looked. She married into my black family for the wealth and the status, but she never missed a chance to remind me that she thought she was inherently better than me. Before I could even process the absolute cruelty of her words on the day we buried my parents, the heavy oak front door swung wide open. Marcus stepped out onto the porch. My 35-year-old brother was the undisputed golden child of the family. He wore a custom-tailored black suit that probably cost more than some people make in a month. He was a University of Pennsylvania graduate, a self-proclaimed wealth management genius, and the man my parents had spent their entire lives protecting and coddling. He looked at me standing in the freezing rain, and his face twisted with pure disgust. He was holding something dark and worn in his hands. He tossed it carelessly over the railing. It hit my chest before falling into the mud next to my bag. It was a cheap, threadbare winter coat I had bought from a discount store 5 years ago when I first moved out of this house. "Put that on and get off my property," Marcus spat, his voice echoing over the sound of the rain. "What did you honestly expect, Naomi? Did you really think Mom and Dad were going to leave this $2 million mansion to a college dropout who poured coffee for a living? You have always been a disgrace to our family legacy. You embarrassed them when you quit school, and you are embarrassing me right now standing on my lawn. Enjoy being homeless, because I am going to make sure you do not get a single dime when the lawyers read the will next week. Now get off my estate before I call the police and have you removed for trespassing." He stood there next to his smirking wife, waiting for me to break down. They wanted tears. They wanted me to fall to my knees and beg for a place to sleep. They expected the broke, helpless little sister to panic. But I did not cry. I did not scream or curse or beg. Instead, I slowly bent down and picked up my muddy overnight bag. I ignored the cheap coat lying in the dirt. I looked up at the porch, locking eyes with my brother. A slow, calm smile spread across my face. "Are you absolutely sure you want to lock this door on me, Marcus?" I calmly asked, my voice completely steady over the pouring rain. He scoffed, turned his back to me, and slammed the heavy oak door shut with a loud final thud. I stood alone in the rain for just a moment longer, letting the cold water wash over my face. Then I turned around and began walking down the long, winding driveway. I did not pull out my phone to order an Uber. I did not walk to the bus stop. I walked straight to the corner of the street where a sleek black bulletproof Maybach S-Class was waiting with the engine running. My private driver stepped out immediately, opening the rear door and holding a large umbrella over my head. I climbed into the heated leather interior, leaving the Buckhead estate behind me. My brother thought he had just thrown a helpless victim out into the cold. He had no idea that he had just locked himself inside a house that he did not actually own. The heavy doors of the Maybach clicked shut, instantly silencing the drumming rain and the chaotic noise of my family. I sank back into the heated leather seats, letting the quiet luxury of the cabin wrap around me. My driver, a silent professional who had been with me for 3 years, pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving the sprawling Buckhead estate completely in the rearview mirror. I slowly poured myself a chilled glass of sparkling water from the customized center console. For the first time all day, away from their judging eyes, I finally allowed my tense shoulders to drop and took a long, deep breath. But the peace only lasted exactly 4 minutes. My phone resting on the console began to vibrate frantically. It was a relentless, rapid-fire, angry buzzing pattern that I knew all too well. It was the official family group chat. I picked up the device and watched the screen light up with notifications. Marcus was already spinning the narrative. He sent a massive paragraph to all 20 extended family members. He wrote that I had thrown a ghetto tantrum on the front porch, demanding a cut of our parents' money before they were even cold in the ground. He claimed he had to escort me off the property for his own safety and Chloe's peace of mind. The cruel responses from aunts, uncles, and cousins flooded in almost instantly, filling my screen with relentless, unyielding judgment. My relatives did not ask for my side of the story. They did not ask if I was okay. They immediately took the word of the golden child. Auntie Viv, the loudest voice in our church choir, and the self-appointed matriarch of the family, was the first to attack. She sent an overly dramatic voice note that automatically played through my phone speaker, echoing through the quiet luxury of the car. Naomi, I am entirely ashamed of you. Your brother is the head of the family now. You need to bow your head, humble your spirit, and respect the man of the house. You have always been rebellious, always questioning authority, always bringing shame to the family name. Auntie Viv continued her tirade, reminding the entire group chat how my parents had sacrificed everything so Marcus could attend the University of Pennsylvania. She conveniently left out the part where my parents emptied my college savings account to cover his fraternity dues and luxury apartment rent. When I confronted them about it 10 years ago, Auntie Viv told me that boys needed more financial backing to look successful, while I could just find a hardworking man to marry. When I made the hard choice to drop out of Spelman College instead of taking on massive, crippling, predatory loans to cover the exact funds they stole, they immediately branded me the ultimate family failure. I was the scapegoat. Marcus was the investment. They poured every ounce of their love, their pride, and their finances into him. Now this incredibly delusional woman was actually demanding I apologize to the arrogant man who had just maliciously thrown a cheap coat at my face out in the freezing rain. Before I could even process the absolute audacity of Auntie Viv, a separate notification popped up at the top of my screen. It was a direct message from Chloe. She did not post this in the main chat. She wanted to deliver this specific brand of poison privately. I opened the message. It read, Naomi, I know your people tend to get loud and aggressive when you feel emotional, but you really need to submit to your brother. He has a UPenn degree and a high-level career. You have nothing. It is best if you just step aside and let the educated people handle the estate. Let me know if you need $20 for dinner tonight. I sat there and stared blankly at the bright, glowing screen for a long, quiet moment, feeling a cold wave of utter disbelief wash over me. Your people. She loved using phrases like that. She constantly weaponized her white tears and her perceived superiority to put me in my place. She married a black man for his presumed generational wealth, but she harbored a deep-seated resentment for independent black women who did not bow to her. She thought my lack of an Ivy League degree meant I lacked intelligence. She genuinely believed I was a broke, uneducated high school graduate who spent her days struggling to survive. I did not type out an angry paragraph. I did not send a voice note defending my character. I did not try to explain that grief does not look the same on everyone. Arguing with people committed to misunderstanding you is a complete waste of breath. I simply opened the family group chat, scrolled past the barrage of insults from my cousins and aunts, and replied with a single thumbs up emoji. Then I blocked the entire group. I securely locked my phone and casually tossed it onto the empty leather seat beside me. Sierra, my executive assistant, was sitting quietly in the front passenger seat. She turned around and handed me a sleek titanium iPad Pro. The screen was glowing with a highly secured legal document. Sierra spoke softly but confidently, confirming that our elite legal team had absolutely finalized the complex paperwork just moments ago. I calmly took the digital pen right from her hand. I looked down at the header of the contract. It read in bold black letters, "Acquisition of delinquent mortgages and transfer debt obligations." Below that header were the names of the original debtors, my parents and my brother Marcus. I smoothly signed my name at the bottom of the screen, legally securing every single cent of their financial ruin. They thought I was a dropout with nothing to my name. They had absolutely no idea I was the apex predator, silently circling their rapidly sinking ship waiting to strike. I handed the sleek titanium iPad back to Sierra and let out a soft, genuine laugh, picking up my crystal glass of red wine from the Maybach console. I tilted my head back, swirling the deep crimson liquid, watching the blurred city lights of Atlanta glide past the tinted windows. My reflection in the glass was perfectly calm, a stark contrast to the absolute chaos my brother was desperately trying to orchestrate. My family loved to throw the phrase Spelman dropout in my face like it was a permanent brand of failure. They wore Marcus's Ivy League degree like a badge of honor, utterly convinced that sitting in a lecture hall and kissing the right rings was the only valid path to success. But I did not drop out because I could not handle the coursework. I dropped out because the curriculum was moving entirely too slow for the speed of my ambition. While my peers were memorizing outdated economic theories and fighting for entry-level internships, I was studying the raw, unforgiving reality of wealth transfer. I discovered the highly lucrative, often ruthless world of distressed debt. I realized very early on that the people with the real power were not the ones taking out the loans to buy the fancy houses and the luxury cars. The people with the absolute ultimate power were the ones who owned the paper. So I quietly packed my bags, left campus, and started buying up delinquent accounts for pennies on the dollar. I did not buy designer clothes or lease expensive vehicles to look successful for people who did not matter. I lived in a tiny, cramped apartment, ate cheap meals, and reinvested every single dollar I made back into purchasing more debt. Over the course of a decade, that relentless, silent grind compounded. It metastasized into something massive and unstoppable. It grew into Midas Holdings. Today, I do not just manage money or advise clients like my brother pretends to do. I am a multi-million-dollar debt acquisition and distressed real estate empire. I am the bank. And while I was quietly building generational wealth from the shadows, my brother Marcus was busy playing dress-up. He was drowning himself in high-interest loans to maintain the illusion of being a top-tier wealth manager, desperate to keep up appearances for his entitled wife and our deeply gullible extended family. He was a hollow shell painted in gold leaf, and the paint was finally starting to chip. But Marcus was never satisfied with just being the favorite child. His fragile ego required my complete and total submission. Kicking me out into the freezing rain was not enough for him. He needed to make absolutely sure I stayed at the bottom, permanently crushed beneath his designer shoes. As my Maybach cruised toward my penthouse, my phone buzzed with an incoming priority email. It was from David, the Chief Executive Officer of Vanguard Realty, one of the most prestigious commercial and luxury real estate brokerages in the entire city. Marcus, operating under the pathetic, outdated assumption that I was still a struggling low-level freelance agent, had spent his entire afternoon making frantic phone calls to every major brokerage in Atlanta. He was actively trying to blacklist me in the industry. He wanted to make sure no one would hire me effectively, cutting off what he thought was my only source of income. He wanted me to have no choice but to come crawling back to him, begging for a handout so he could finally force me to submit to his authority. David's email contained a brief, highly professional message and an attached audio file. The text simply read, "I thought you should hear this immediately." I tapped the audio file and turned the volume up. Marcus's voice filled the quiet, insulated cabin of the car. He sounded deeply arrogant, but beneath the practiced corporate bravado, there was a sharp, frantic edge of panic that he could not quite hide. "I am just giving you a heads up as a professional courtesy," Marcus said on the recording, his voice tight. "My sister Naomi is going to be looking for work. Do not hire her. She is broke, desperate, and completely toxic to a professional environment. We just had to cut her off from the family estate today because she is a massive liability." David, playing his part perfectly, responded with cool professional detachment, thanking Marcus for the tip. But Marcus could not stop talking. His ego simply would not let him hang up the phone without trying to flex his imaginary financial muscle. He cleared his throat and lowered his voice, attempting to sound like two heavyweights discussing high-level business behind closed doors. "By the way," Marcus added, shifting gears far too quickly, "I am currently liquidating a few minor assets to restructure my portfolio. I am looking for a quick off-the-books cash advance on a commercial property. Just a bridge loan to cover a minor margin call that popped up this morning. Do you have any private lenders who can move fast?" I paused the recording and let out another slow, genuinely amused laugh, taking a final sip of my wine. Marcus had absolutely no idea. He had no idea that Vanguard Realty was not just a successful independent brokerage. It was a direct, wholly owned subsidiary of Midas Holdings. My brother had just called my own employee to badmouth me and practically beg for cash. And that minor margin call he tried to play off so casually was not minor at all. A margin call meant his brokers were demanding immediate cash to cover his failing highly leveraged investments, or they would begin liquidating his entire portfolio by force. He was bleeding capital at an unsustainable rate. He was not just broke, he was drowning, and the sharks were already circling. I leaned back into the plush leather seat and tapped out a quick, decisive reply to David. I typed, "Tell him you have a private lender who can cover the margin call immediately. Make the interest rate punitive and use the Buckhead family estate as the sole collateral. Do whatever it takes to secure that signature today." I locked my phone and watched the city skyline reflect in my empty wineglass. Marcus wanted to play games with our family legacy, but he was about to learn a very painful lesson. You never gamble with money you do not have, especially when your little sister is the one holding all the chips. 2 days before the official reading of my parents, the family gathered at the Buckhead estate for what they were calling a memorial cookout. In reality, it was a poorly disguised victory party for my brother. The thick Georgia heat hung heavy in the air, mixing with the smell of hickory smoke from the massive outdoor grill and the cheap floral perfume my aunts always bathed in. The sprawling backyard was manicured to perfection. Dozens of relatives were scattered across the patio, holding plastic cups of sweet tea and pretending to mourn while actually just positioning themselves to get in my brother's good graces. They all assumed Marcus was about to inherit millions. I walked through the wrought iron side gates, wearing a simple tailored silk linen set, carrying myself with a calm that clearly unsettled the relatives who noticed my arrival. I had barely stepped onto the travertine patio when Chloe intercepted me. She wore a pristine white sundress, looking entirely out of place next to the smoking grill. In her manicured hands, she held a half-full black trash bag and a pair of grease-stained metal tongs. She thrust them toward my chest with a sickly sweet, entirely fake smile. "Naomi, thank goodness you are here," Chloe chimed. Her voice raised just loud enough to make sure the nearby relatives heard her. "We are practically drowning in preparations. Could you handle the grill, sweetie? You are so good with manual labor and getting your hands dirty. It would be a huge help to Marcus. She wanted to reduce me to the hired help in front of my own family. Before I could even decline the tongs, Auntie Viv's booming voice echoed from the center of the patio. She was holding court in a large wicker chair, fanning herself aggressively while holding a plate of ribs. She gestured grandly toward Marcus, who was standing nearby smoking a cigar and looking immensely pleased with himself. "Look at the man of this house," Auntie Viv announced to her captive audience of nodding cousins, stepping right up to take care of this massive family estate without missing a single beat. And he is doing it with his beautiful, elegant white wife standing faithfully by his side. That right there is what a successful, respectable family looks like. Auntie Viv then turned her sharp, judgmental gaze directly onto me. Her eyes raked up and down my outfit, her lip curling in a familiar sneer. "Naomi, you really need to take notes from Chloe. Being a loud, single, independent black woman does not keep a man, and it certainly does not build a legacy. All that aggressive energy just pushes wealth away. You need to soften up, smooth that natural hair down, and learn how to serve if you ever want to sit at the big table in life." The toxic colorism and deep-seated misogynoir flowed out of her mouth as easily as breathing. My own aunt was sitting in my parents' backyard, openly degrading my dark skin, my natural features, and my independence, while elevating my brother's mediocre white wife as the ultimate standard of grace. It was the same generational sickness this family had fed me my entire life. They worshipped proximity to whiteness and patriarchy, and they actively punished any black woman in the family who dared to outshine the men. I looked down at the greasy tongs Chloe was still holding out to me. I did not raise my voice. I did not snatch the tongs and throw them. I simply gave Chloe a slow, pitying smile and stepped right past her, leaving her standing there with her arm awkwardly extended in the air. I walked straight toward the main patio dining table. It was the table specifically reserved for Marcus, Chloe, and the elder aunts. Chloe had placed her handbag right in the center of the table to mark her territory. It was a fake designer bag, stiff plastic looking with hardware that was far too shiny. I pulled out my chair, sat directly at the head of the table, and calmly placed my bag right next to hers. My bag was an authentic, highly exclusive Hermes Birkin in matte black crocodile skin. It cost $30,000, purchased entirely in cash. I set it down with a soft, heavy thud. The contrast between my flawless, meticulously crafted luxury asset and her cheap, chemically smelling knockoff was blindingly obvious. Chloe walked up to the table, saw my bag sitting next to hers, and stopped dead in her tracks. She might not have understood the complexities of corporate finance, but she absolutely understood the universal language of wealth. Her face instantly flushed a deep, blotchy red. She quickly snatched her fake bag off the table and hugged it to her chest, utterly humiliated without me having to speak a single word. Marcus saw his wife turn crimson. He saw me sitting comfortably at the head of the family table. His fragile ego simply could not handle the visual of me refusing to bow. He threw his cigar onto the grass and stormed over his chest, puffed out his face, twisted in rage. "What do you think you are doing?" Marcus demanded, slamming his hand flat on the glass table. "Get out of that chair right now. You do not sit here. Go to the backyard and help with the trash. You are lucky I even let you through the gates today after the stunt you pulled at the funeral. Move." I did not flinch. I took my time, gracefully crossing my legs and looking up at him with absolute serenity. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my silk trousers. I stepped directly into Marcus's personal space. He tried to maintain his aggressive stance, trying to physically intimidate me by towering over me. I leaned in close, bringing my lips right next to his ear. I did not yell. I let my voice drop into a dead, icy whisper. Cross-collateralized default. Marcus stopped breathing. His entire body went completely rigid. I pulled back just enough to watch the exact moment his reality shattered. The arrogant rage vanished from his eyes, instantly replaced by pure, unadulterated terror. He knew exactly what those 3 words meant. It was the specific financial code that indicated his highly leveraged offshore loans were failing, and that the bank was legally allowed to seize every single asset tied to his name to cover the debt. He started sweating profusely. His jaw worked silently, but no words came out. He stared at me, his eyes wide, and panicked, finally realizing that the little sister he had been tormenting was the exact same monster holding the deed to his entire life. Exactly 2 days later, the thin facade of family mourning was entirely dropped, replaced by the palpable, greedy anticipation of a massive payout. We were gathered in the pristine waiting room of Mr. Sterling's downtown Atlanta law firm. Mr. Sterling catered to the city's old money elite. His office smelled of rich mahogany, expensive leather, and serious business. The atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly tense, but I was entirely at peace. I sat in a high-backed leather wing chair in the corner, my posture relaxed, my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not flip through the financial magazines on the table. I did not check my phone. I simply kept my gaze locked in a dead, unblinking focus on the frosted glass doors of the inner office. I was perfectly still, watching the grand performance unfold. The heavy wooden double doors of the waiting room swung open and Marcus strutted in. He walked with his chest puffed out, moving like a conquering king returning to claim his rightful throne. If my whispered warning at the cookout had rattled him, he was doing a phenomenal job of masking his terror with pure, unadulterated arrogance. I knew exactly what had happened over the last 48 hours. He had undoubtedly spent the entire weekend desperately calling his offshore brokers, getting the runaround, and convincing himself that I was just bluffing. To his fragile mind, I was just his younger sister, throwing around financial buzzwords I had read in a magazine. He desperately needed today's inheritance to be real, so he could survive his margin calls, so his brain simply rejected any other reality. Chloe clung tightly to his arm, looking like a walking billboard for financial desperation. She was dripping in entirely new designer clothing. She wore a bright pink tweed Chanel jacket that still had the stiff, uncreased look of a garment pulled straight off a boutique rack that very morning. A massive logo heavy Gucci belt was buckled tightly around her waist, and brand new red-bottom stilettos clicked loudly against the polished marble floor. It was glaringly obvious that she had gone on a massive shopping spree the day before. She had undoubtedly swiped credit cards she could not actually afford to pay off, absolutely certain that a multi-million-dollar inheritance check was going to clear by Friday afternoon. She wanted to look the part of a wealthy heiress, but she just looked frantic and cheap. Auntie Viv trailed closely behind them, nodding approvingly at Marcus's sharp charcoal suit. She completely ignored my presence in the corner, taking a seat on the velvet sofa and waiting for the coronation to begin. Marcus spotted me and immediately smirked. The fake confidence radiated off him in toxic waves. He dropped Chloe's arm, walked over, and stood directly over my chair, adjusting his silk tie with a flourish. "Well, look who actually decided to show up," Marcus sneered, pitching his voice loud enough for the receptionist and Auntie Viv to hear. "I am honestly surprised you bothered to come all the way down here today, Naomi. Did you have to take the bus, or did you convince one of your little friends to give you a ride?" I did not blink. I did not shift my weight. I just stared up at him, letting the silence stretch out. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. "I really hope you are not expecting a big payday today." Mom and Dad knew exactly who was capable of handling the family legacy and who was a complete liability. The absolute most you are going to get out of those legal documents today is Mom's old sewing machine. Maybe you can use it to tailor that attitude of yours and finally learn some respect. Chloe giggled, stepping up next to him and tossing her freshly highlighted blonde hair over her shoulder. She leaned in, her cheap floral perfume clashing violently with the refined scent of the law office. "Do not be too mean to her, Marcus," Chloe cooed with a poisonous theatrical sweetness. "Naomi, sweetie, if you need a little help after today, just let us know. If you need a loan for a studio apartment somewhere on the south side, Marcus might help you if you ask nicely. You just have to learn how to appreciate your family." Auntie Viv chimed in loudly from the sofa, clapping her hands together once. "Amen to that. It is about time this girl learned her place in the natural order of things." I let their insults wash over me like water over a smooth stone. They were so incredibly predictable, so remarkably loud, in their blinding ignorance. They had no idea that they were standing directly on a trapdoor, and I was the one holding the lever. I looked at Chloe's brand new shoes, at Marcus's smug face, and I felt a profound sense of tranquility. They were doing exactly what I wanted them to do. They were climbing as high as they possibly could on their rickety ladder of arrogance. I knew that the higher they climbed right now, the more devastating the impending fall was going to be. I remained perfectly silent, offering them nothing but a calm, intensely focused stare. My absolute refusal to engage seemed to deeply agitate Marcus. His smirk faltered slightly. He opened his mouth to hurl another insult, desperately needing a reaction from me to validate his dominance in the room. Before he could speak a single word, the frosted glass door to the inner office clicked open. Mr. Sterling stepped out into the waiting room. He was a distinguished old-school black attorney in his late 60s. He was a man who had built his formidable reputation on airtight contracts, brutal honesty, and a zero-tolerance policy for foolishness. He held a thick, heavy manila folder in his hands. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Mr. Sterling did not smile. He did not offer the usual polite condolences or pleasantries. He stopped in the center of the room and looked directly at my brother. The look on the old lawyer's face was chilling. It was a heavy, complicated mixture of deep pity and absolute, unfiltered disgust. Marcus immediately puffed out his chest, stepping away from Chloe to present himself as the strong patriarch. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said brightly, extending a confident hand. "It is so good to see you. Let us get this reading over with so we can get the estate deeds transferred into my name today." Mr. Sterling did not take the offered hand. He looked down at the thick folder, then back up at Marcus, his jaw tightly clenched. He let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to drain all the air from the room. "Marcus, sit down." Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a gravelly, deadly serious register. "You are going to need to brace yourself for this." Camera 1, pushing in slowly. Mr. Sterling walked around his massive mahogany desk and took his seat, placing the thick manila folder precisely in the center of the leather blotter. He adjusted his gold-rimmed reading glasses, his eyes darting toward Marcus with a look of profound weariness. Marcus swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing against his tight silk collar. For a fleeting second, the absolute terror I had instilled in him at the cookout flashed across his face. But then he looked at Chloe, who was practically vibrating with greed in her pristine pink tweed jacket, and he forced a tight, arrogant smile. He sank into the plush leather chair opposite Mr. Sterling, crossing one leg over the other, attempting to project the relaxed confidence of a man who was entirely in control of his destiny. Auntie Viv leaned forward on the velvet sofa, her eyes wide, entirely eager to witness my final humiliation. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat, a low, rumbling sound that commanded total silence in the room. He opened the folder. The crisp sound of heavy parchment paper turning seemed exceptionally loud. He began to read the standard legal preamble, his voice dry and devoid of any emotion. I remained perfectly still in my wing chair in the corner, watching the micro-expressions play across my family members' faces. Marcus was gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly, his knuckles were turning white. He desperately needed this. He needed the liquidity to cover the massive margin calls threatening to liquidate his entire fraudulent portfolio. He needed the validation. He needed to prove to everyone in this room that he was the rightful heir, the golden investment, the only child who truly mattered. "We will now proceed to the distribution of assets," Mr. Sterling announced, running a finger down the first page. Part 1. To our son Marcus, we leave the entirety of our liquid cash accounts, the vintage automobile collection, and all family heirlooms contained within the primary residence. Marcus let out a breath he had clearly been holding for days. His shoulders dropped. The color rushed back into his face. A sickeningly triumphant grin spread from ear to ear. Chloe let out a tiny high-pitched squeal of delight, clutching his arm and bouncing slightly in her seat. She was already mentally spending that cash, already calculating how many more designer knockoffs and credit card minimum payments she could cover. Auntie Viv beamed, nodding her head in absolute approval. This was exactly the natural order they all expected. Marcus was the king, and he had just been handed his crown. The cash accounts and the cars were the glittering prizes they could show off to their country club friends. It was everything Marcus needed to hear to completely erase the dread I had planted in his mind. Mr. Sterling did not pause for their celebration. He simply turned the page, his expression remaining entirely grim. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine across the room for a brief, heavy moment. Then he looked back down at the document. "And to our daughter, Naomi." Mr. Sterling read, his voice cutting through the quiet murmurs of celebration. "We leave the truth." The room went dead silent for exactly 2 seconds before it completely erupted. Auntie Viv threw her head back and let out a booming, theatrical cackle that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. She literally clapped her hands together, slapping her palms in a rhythm of pure, toxic joy. She looked at me with undisguised malice. "The truth," she hollered, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. "That is exactly what that girl needs. She needs the truth about her place in this world." My parents knew exactly what they were doing. Chloe uncrossed her legs, her brand new red-bottom stilettos clicking sharply against the floor. The anxiety that had been radiating off her entirely melted away, replaced by a vicious, condescending smirk. She looked at me like I was something she had just scraped off the bottom of her expensive shoe. "Wow, the truth?" Chloe said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "That is so deep, Naomi. Really it is. But you cannot pay rent with the truth, honey. You cannot buy groceries with it either. Maybe it will keep you warm at night in whatever tiny little apartment you are living in." Marcus was practically glowing. His fragile ego had been fully restored by the legal validation of his superiority. He stood up abruptly, drawing himself to his full height. He smoothed down the front of his charcoal suit jacket, shooting his cuffs with a practiced, arrogant flourish. He looked down at me with absolute, unfiltered disdain. He had completely forgotten the terror he felt at the cookout. He was back in his fantasy world, reigning supreme over the family empire. "Well, that is that," Marcus declared, his voice booming with false authority. "The matter is settled." He turned his attention away from me, treating me as if I had already ceased to exist. "Mr. Sterling, let us get this paperwork moving. I have a very busy schedule today and some minor liquidity restructuring to handle this afternoon. Let us transfer the deed to the Buckhead estate into my name immediately." Marcus then turned back to me, pointing a rigid finger toward the heavy wooden double doors of the waiting room. "Naomi, get out. You have overstayed your welcome, and we have real family business to conduct." I did not move a single muscle. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I just watched him, maintaining my absolute serenity. Mr. Sterling did not reach for the deed. He did not pull out a pen. The old lawyer's face darkened with a mixture of profound exhaustion and deep-seated anger. He raised his hand and brought his open palm down flat against the heavy mahogany desk with a loud, cracking slam that shocked the room into instant, breathless silence. Auntie Viv stopped laughing. Chloe jumped in her seat. Marcus froze, his arms still pointed toward the door. "Sit down, Marcus," Mr. Sterling barked, his voice vibrating with absolute, undeniable authority. "I have not read Section 2, and trust me, you do not own this estate." The heavy, suffocating silence that fell over the mahogany-paneled office was absolute. Marcus remained frozen halfway out of his chair, his arms still rigidly extended toward the door. The triumphant, arrogant sneer had completely vanished from his face, replaced by a hollow, uncomprehending stare. He looked at Mr. Sterling, then glanced back at the thick manila folder resting on the leather blotter. Slowly, mechanically, Marcus lowered his arm and sank back into his seat. The leather groaned under his weight, a sharp, jarring sound in the dead quiet room. I did not shift my posture. I remained perfectly reclined in my wing chair, my hands resting elegantly in my lap, my expression completely serene. I was a spectator watching a meticulously rigged building prepared for a controlled demolition. Mr. Sterling adjusted his gold-rimmed reading glasses and carefully broke the heavy red wax seal on the second half of the document. He cleared his throat, but there was no sympathy in his eyes. When he looked at Marcus, his gaze was harder than granite. He smoothed the heavy parchment paper flat and began to read. Section 2. Mr. Sterling announced, his gravelly voice echoing off the walls. To our son Marcus, we leave the absolute burden of his own actions. It is with profound devastation that we must legally document the reality of our financial ruin. For the past 5 years, Marcus has systematically and maliciously embezzled funds from our primary business accounts, our personal retirement funds, and our long-term savings portfolios. He utilized his position as our financial proxy to drain our life's work, funneling millions of dollars into offshore dummy accounts to fund an unsustainable, fraudulent lifestyle of luxury cars, designer goods, and country club memberships. The temperature in the room plummeted. Chloe let out a sharp, ragged gasp. She whipped her head around to stare at her husband. Her eyes were wide with pure, unfiltered horror. Her hands flew to the lapels of her brand-new pink Chanel jacket, gripping the fabric as if she suddenly realized it was woven entirely out of stolen money. Marcus did not look at her. He stared straight ahead at the polished wood of the desk, his face draining of all color until his skin took on the sickly ashen hue of a corpse. He stopped breathing. When we uncovered the full extent of the fraud 18 months ago, Mr. Sterling continued reading, ignoring the absolute shockwave ripping through the room. We were faced with an impossible choice. We could report our only son to the federal authorities and watch him serve a lengthy prison sentence for grand larceny and wire fraud, or we could sacrifice everything to cover his tracks. As his parents, we made the hardest choice. We took out a massive predatory second mortgage against the fully owned Buckhead estate. We liquidated every remaining asset we possessed to silently replace the stolen funds and satisfy the federal auditors before Marcus was indicted. We purchased his freedom with our total financial destruction. A loud clattering noise broke the tension. Auntie Viv had dropped her ornate folding fan. It hit the marble floor and slid under the coffee table. Her jaw hung completely slack. The self-appointed loud-mouthed matriarch of the family, the woman who had spent my entire life loudly praising Marcus as the ultimate standard of success while degrading my existence, was completely speechless. She stared at her golden boy, her eyes darting frantically as her entire worldview shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The investment she had praised, the man she had worshipped, was nothing but a common thief who had bled his own parents dry to buy his wife designer shoes. Because of the sheer magnitude of the debt required to cover his crimes, Mr. Sterling read, his voice rising with righteous anger. We die completely and entirely bankrupt. The cash accounts mentioned in Section 1 are currently overdrawn. The vintage automobile collection was seized by creditors 3 weeks ago. There is no money. There is no inheritance. There is only the truth. We leave this truth to our daughter Naomi as an apology for our blindness and because it is the only thing of value we have left to give. Mr. Sterling closed the folder and folded his hands on top of it. He looked directly at Marcus. Your parents died completely bankrupt because of you, Marcus. The estate was foreclosed on 3 days ago. Chloe physically recoiled. She shoved her chair away from Marcus, the legs screeching loudly against the floor. She looked at him with absolute revulsion, breathing heavily, realizing that the massive credit card debt she had accumulated yesterday was now solely her problem. She was married to a broke, fraudulent criminal. Marcus violently shook his head. The denial kicked in, frantic and desperate. He slammed both hands onto the desk and bolted upright, his chest heaving. "No," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "No, that is impossible. That is a complete lie. I checked the bank registry myself just this morning. The original bank did not foreclose. A private equity firm bought the distressed debt. I know how these things work. They bought the paper for pennies on the dollar. I was going to call them this afternoon. I was going to leverage my corporate network and negotiate new terms with them. I can fix this. I am a wealth manager. I know how to handle private equity firms." He was sweating profusely, spittle flying from his lips as he desperately tried to cling to his fake financial authority. He looked around the room, begging someone, anyone, to believe his frantic corporate jargon. Mr. Sterling did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply turned his head and looked directly at me. sitting quietly in the corner. A small, grim smile touched the corner of the old lawyer's mouth. They did not just buy the debt, Marcus Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping into a register of absolute finality. They bought the deed. I stood up from the leather wing chair, slowly letting the deliberate nature of my movement command the attention of every single person in the room. The oppressive, suffocating silence remained unbroken as I walked over to the small side table where I had rested my sleek black leather briefcase. The metallic snap of the brass clasps opening was as sharp as a gunshot in the quiet office. I reached inside and withdrew a thick, crisp document bound in a blue legal backing. I walked over to the massive mahogany desk. Mr. Sterling leaned back in his chair, granting me the floor. With a smooth, practiced motion, I tossed the document onto the polished wood. It glided effortlessly across the smooth surface and came to a dead stop exactly 1 inch from Marcus's white, trembling fingertips. Midas Holdings bought the debt. Marcus Weiss said, my voice completely level, devoid of any anger or malice. It was the voice of a professional delivering a finalized business transaction. Marcus stared down at the document as if it were a live grenade. His chest was heaving under his tailored charcoal suit. He blinked rapidly, trying to clear the panic from his vision. His trembling hands hesitated before finally reaching out to touch the heavy paper. He flipped open the cover page, his eyes darting frantically across the dense legal jargon, searching desperately for a loophole, a typo, a technicality that would save him from the abyss. He read the name of the purchasing firm out loud, his voice raspy and thin. Midas Holdings. He looked up at me, his face twisted in a mask of total incomprehension. He could not make the connection. His arrogant brain simply refused to process the reality standing right in front of him. Who? He stammered, swallowing hard. Who owns Midas Holdings? I looked down at him. I looked at the man who had spent his entire life belittling me, stealing from our parents, and parading around as the king of a fake empire. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. It was a smile born of absolute, untouchable peace. I do, I replied. The 2 words landed with the devastating force of a physical blow. Marcus flinched, his jaw dropping open. I held his terrified gaze, refusing to let him look away. I am the bank, Marcus. I continued, my tone dropping to a cold, hard register. When Mom and Dad took out that massive, predatory second mortgage to cover the millions of dollars you stole from them, they signed away the deed as collateral. When they died bankrupt because of your greed, the bank moved to foreclose. I stepped in. I purchased the distressed debt through my holding company. You do not get the Buckhead estate today. You do not get a single dime. What you get is the $3 million liability attached to your fraudulent actions. You inherit the debt, and I am collecting. The color drained entirely from Chloe's face. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. The brand new pink tweed Chanel jacket suddenly looked like a straitjacket. She had swiped her credit cards to the absolute limit just 24 hours ago, banking entirely on a multi-million-dollar payday to cover her tracks. She slowly turned her head to look at her husband. The man she thought was a financial titan was actually a desperate criminal, and she was legally tethered to his sinking ship. She shrank back into her chair, pressing herself as far away from Marcus as physically possible. Auntie Viv was paralyzed on the velvet sofa. Her hands were clutching her chest. The golden child she had worshipped, the nephew she had relentlessly weaponized against me, was a common thief. Her entire worldview, her rigid hierarchy of who was worthy and who was a failure, had just been incinerated. She stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, finally seeing the predator hiding beneath the quiet demeanor she had always mocked. Marcus tried to speak, but only a pathetic wheezing sound escaped his throat. He was gripping the edge of the mahogany desk so hard his fingernails were turning purple. He was trapped. There was no offshore broker to call. There was no mother or father left to manipulate or steal from. There was only me, the younger sister he had dismissed as a liability, holding the chains of his financial ruin. To ensure the historical record is entirely clear for the probate courts, Mr. Sterling interjected, his voice carrying the heavy, formal weight of a judge passing down a final sentence. It is my duty as the executor of this estate to formally document the financial standing of the primary creditor. Mr. Sterling pulled a separate sheet of paper from his manila folder. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and looked directly at my brother. Midas Holdings is a fully owned subsidiary of Naomi's primary corporate entity. Mr. Sterling read aloud, enunciating every single syllable for maximum impact. Through a diverse portfolio of commercial real estate acquisitions, venture capital investments, and proprietary software patents, developed over the last 7 years, the primary creditor's financial status has been thoroughly audited and legally verified. For the record, Naomi's current verified net worth is $45 million. The number hung in the air, heavy and absolute. $45 million. It was a figure so astronomically high, so completely out of the realm of Marcus's fake rich lifestyle, that it broke his mind. He had sold his soul, betrayed his parents, and risked federal prison just to pretend to be a fraction of what I actually was. Marcus let out a strangled, breathless gasp. His eyes went completely wide, staring blindly at the ceiling. The crushing weight of his margin calls, his impending criminal liability, his complete public humiliation, and the sheer, unadulterated reality of my dominance hit him all at once. His body simply gave out. His eyes rolled all the way back into his head, showing only the whites. His knees buckled instantly. He collapsed forward, sliding off the slick leather chair like a rag doll. He hit the floor with a heavy, sickening thud, his cheek bouncing off the thick Persian rug. Chloe threw her hands over her face and let out a piercing, hysterical scream. A slow, invisible slider seemed to pull back, taking in the sheer, spectacular wreckage of the room. The mahogany office, previously a symbol of elite intimidation, had become a sterile viewing box for my family's total destruction. Chloe's piercing, hysterical scream bounced off the wood-paneled walls, a sharp, grating sound of pure panic that forced Mr. Sterling to wince and adjust his glasses. Mr. Sterling did not reach for a phone to call paramedics. He did not look concerned. He simply let out a long, exhausted sigh, pushed his chair back, and walked over to a crystal pitcher resting on the corner bar. He poured a tall glass of ice water, walked back to the center of the room, and unceremoniously splashed the freezing contents directly onto Marcus's face. Marcus gasped violently, his eyes flying open. He thrashed on the expensive Persian rug like a beached fish, coughing and sputtering as the ice water soaked his pristine silk tie and pooled around his collar. He groggily tried to prop himself up on his elbows, blinking rapidly, as the crushing, suffocating reality of his situation flooded back into his conscious mind. Chloe was pressed flat against the far wall of the office, hyperventilating. Her chest heaved erratically under the stiff pink tweed of her Chanel jacket. She looked at her husband groveling on the wet floor as if he were a diseased animal. The mental math was happening behind her frantic eyes in brutal, unforgiving real time. The designer shopping spree she took yesterday, the massive credit card minimums, the luxury car leases, the country club dues, it was all built on a foundation of absolute fraud. The generational wealth she thought she had married into was an illusion. But worse than the poverty was the debt. She was legally bound to a convicted embezzler drowning in $3 million of liability. And the absolute most devastating part of this new reality was who held the leash. It was me. The black woman she had spent years actively belittling, mocking and racially terrorizing with endless microaggressions and outright slurs behind closed doors. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had completely inverted, trapping her under my heel. Chloe erupted. She launched herself forward, her brand-new red-bottom stilettos clicking sharply, but she did not bend down to help her husband. Instead, she kicked the sole of his expensive leather shoe. "You absolute fraud!" Chloe shrieked, her voice losing every single ounce of its practiced country club refinement. "You lied to me. You looked me in the eye and told me you managed a blind trust. You told me the Buckhead estate was ours, free and clear. You promised me we were liquid." Marcus weakly raised a shaking hand, water still dripping from his chin. "Chloe, please lower your voice. I can fix this. I just need a little time to restructure the terms. Fix it with what, Marcus? She screamed, her face contorting into an ugly, blotchy red mask of pure rage. You have nothing. You are a broke, pathetic liar. You made me sign those joint tax returns last month. You made me co-sign the new credit lines yesterday. I am legally ruined because of you. You are going to federal prison, and you are trying to drag me down with you. Auntie Viv remained frozen on the sofa, clutching her chest, entirely unable to process the total collapse of her golden boy. She simply stared at the wet, pathetic mess on the rug in a state of catatonic shock. Then Chloe abruptly stopped screaming. A new, desperate calculation flashed across her features. She slowly turned away from Marcus and looked directly at me. The vitriolic rage vanished in a split second, replaced by a frantic, trembling vulnerability. The transition was so seamless, so deeply manipulative, it was genuinely terrifying to witness. The white tears flowed instantly, large, heavy drops spilling over her designer mascara and streaking down her flushed cheeks. She took a tentative step toward my wing chair, clasping her hands together in front of her chest like a penitent beggar asking for salvation. Naomi. Chloe sobbed, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. Naomi, please. You have to understand, I had absolutely no idea he was doing this. I am a victim here too. He manipulated me, just like he manipulated your parents. I am so sorry for what he did to them. I remained perfectly still, my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching her performance with absolute unblinking serenity. I always knew you were special, Chloe wept, taking another step closer, desperately trying to project sisterly solidarity. I always admired your drive and your intelligence. You know, I always supported you right from the beginning. Whenever Marcus said those terrible things about you, I told him to stop. I tried to defend you. We are sisters, Naomi. We are family. You know I love you. She reached out, trying to place a manicured, trembling hand on my knee. I finally moved. I simply raised a single finger, stopping her dead in her tracks. Her hand froze in midair. Without breaking eye contact, I reached back into my open briefcase. I bypassed the thick stack of legal filings and pulled out a single crisp sheet of printer paper. I laid it flat on the mahogany desk and used 2 fingers to smoothly slide it across the polished surface until it stopped directly in front of her. Chloe looked down, the fake tears momentarily stalling as confusion washed over her face. It was a printed, enlarged screenshot. A text message she had sent to a group chat of her country club friends on the exact day of my parents' funeral. I knew exactly what it said, word for vicious word. I had paid a private investigator a significant amount of money to clone her iCloud backup a week ago. The message read, "Thank God the old bats are finally gone. Now Marcus and I just have to figure out how to cut the ghetto stepsister out of the payout. She belongs in the projects, not in Buckhead. I cannot wait to watch her beg." Chloe's face drained of the remaining color. Her mouth opened, but her vocal cords were completely paralyzed. She looked from the paper to my face, realizing in that exact second that I knew everything. I had always known everything. The deafening silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. "Save the tears, Chloe," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet like a freshly sharpened blade. "Your eviction notice is effective in 24 hours. I left the mahogany office without a single backward glance, the sound of Chloe's violent, choking sobs fading behind the heavy double doors. The lobby was dead quiet, the receptionist staring wide-eyed at her computer monitor, terrified to make a sound. I pushed through the glass entrance and stepped out into the sweltering Atlanta heat. The late afternoon sun was blinding, radiating invisible waves off the polished hoods of the luxury cars parked in the firm's private lot. The heavy humidity settled over me immediately, a stark contrast to the sterile air-conditioned icebox I had just dismantled my family inside. I clicked the unlock button on my key fob, making a direct line for my car. My movements were sharp, precise, and entirely unbothered, but they were waiting for me. Auntie Viv had practically sprinted down the back stairwell to cut me off before I could leave the premises. She stood directly between me and the driver's side door of my car, her arms crossed tight over her chest. She was flanked by two of my older cousins, who hovered a few steps behind her, looking utterly bewildered by the chaos that had just unfolded upstairs. The catatonic shock Auntie Viv had displayed in Mr. Sterling's office had mutated rapidly into a desperate cornered aggression. She was panting her wide-brimmed church hat, casting a dark, sharp shadow over her furious, sweating face. "You are not going anywhere, little girl." Auntie Viv spat, her voice trembling with a volatile mixture of blind rage and palpable fear. "You are going to march right back up to that office and fix this mess. You are going to sign that house over to your brother right now." I stopped exactly 2 feet away from her. I did not break eye contact. I did not raise my voice. "Move, Auntie. The devil has truly taken hold of your heart," she preached, stepping forward and pointing a thick, shaking finger inches from my face. "How dare you sit up there and humiliate your own blood? Marcus is your older brother. He is the man of this family now that your father is gone. The Lord commands us to honor our family hierarchy. You have made your millions in the city. You clearly have more money than you could ever possibly spend. You need to forgive this worldly debt, let the past go, and share your blessings with your blood." "Share my blessings?" I asked, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. I stepped forward, tracking her gaze, forcing her to take a half step back against the side of my car. "You want to talk about honoring family? You want to talk about sharing? Let us talk about the summer of 2016. Auntie Viv's eyes darted nervously toward my cousins. She knew exactly what I was talking about, and she knew she was entirely complicit. "Let us talk about the day I walked into the local bank branch to pay my fall tuition for Spelman College." I continued my words, hitting her like physical rhythmic strikes. I stood at that counter, and the teller informed me that my joint savings account had exactly $14 left in it. Marcus had forged my signature. He completely drained the $20,000 I had spent 4 years working double shifts at the diner to save, and he used my education money to put a cash down payment on his first Porsche. He was just a young man finding his footing in the corporate world. Auntie Viv stammered, her righteous tone instantly evaporating into pathetic backpedaling. "He needed to look the part to get ahead. Boys will be boys, Naomi. Men have pressures in this society you simply do not understand." "You sat at my mother's kitchen table," I said, my voice vibrating with years of suppressed icy fury while I cried my eyes out, terrified I would lose my college admission. "And you looked at me, sipped your sweet tea, and said those exact words. Boys will be boys. You told me to take out predatory student loans and let my brother shine. You watched him steal my entire future, and you protected the thief because he wore a suit and carried the family name. That was in the past." Auntie Viv cried, her voice cracking as she grasped for any remaining leverage. "We are talking about right now. We are talking about the survival of this family's legacy in Atlanta. If you let him go to federal prison, if you take his home and put his wife on the street, you are destroying our good name. You are humiliating us in front of the entire congregation." I laughed, a harsh metallic sound that echoed across the empty asphalt of the parking lot. "There is no good name, Auntie. Marcus did not just destroy my parents. His margin calls were massive. He was bleeding cash from every conceivable direction. Do you really think my parents' second mortgage was enough to cover a 5-year multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme?" Auntie Viv stopped breathing. Her aggressive posture completely vanished. She looked at me, a new sickening dread pooling in the depths of her eyes. "He was desperate," I explained, leaning in close, letting her hear the absolute inescapable finality in my tone. "He was taking out private loans from anyone who would hand him a pen. But to secure those loans, he needed collateral. He needed real estate collateral." "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her hands dropping uselessly to her sides. "I am talking about the New Hope Community Center," I said, watching the blood drain completely from her face. "The building you spent 20 years raising funds to build. The pride and joy of your entire congregation. The property you foolishly, blindly allowed Marcus to manage as the church's primary financial trustee." Auntie Viv let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She stumbled backward, her knees giving out, forcing her to lean heavily against the side of my car to keep from collapsing onto the hot pavement. My two cousins gasped, stepping back in absolute horror. He forged the board's signatures, I said, spelling out her ultimate doom with surgical precision. He leveraged the community center for a $1.2 million short-term high-interest loan. He defaulted 3 months ago. The lenders were preparing to seize the building, lock the doors, and sell it to a commercial developer to be bulldozed for a luxury parking garage. She was shaking violently now, tears streaming freely down her face, ruining her immaculate makeup. No. No, Lord, please no. That is God's house. Marcus would never do that to the church. He promised me he was growing the congregation's portfolio. He lied to you just like he lied to everyone else, I said, showing her zero mercy. But you do not need to worry about the commercial developers bulldozing your legacy, Auntie Viv, because they do not hold the note anymore. I watched the horrific world-ending realization dawn on her face. Her eyes went wide, staring at me, as if she were looking directly into the face of a god. I bought that debt too, I said smoothly, turning my back on her to open my car door. I own the community center. I own your church's legacy. I hold the deed to every single thing this family pretends to value. I paused, looking at her shivering form one last time. Now step away from my car before I decide to foreclose on God's house by Friday morning. The scene opens with a fluid, seamless movement from left to right, capturing the suffocating tension hanging over Auntie Viv's formal dining room. By Sunday evening, the aroma of her famous pot roast and buttery yeast rolls was completely overpowered by the stench of sheer desperation. The good china had been laid out, the crystal water goblets filled, but nobody was eating. The extended family sat shoulder to shoulder, their hands tightly clasped together over the lace tablecloth. Auntie Viv sat at the head of the table, her eyes squeezed shut, her voice trembling as she led what was supposed to be a prayer dinner. She was calling on every higher power to deliver their family from the malicious spirit that had supposedly taken hold of me, begging for a miracle to save Marcus from ruin and to keep the church doors open. The heavy oak front door did not simply open. It swung wide with a forceful, heavy thud that echoed through the quiet suburban house. The collective gasp from the dining room was immediate. The fluid tracking of the room halted as every head snapped toward the foyer. I walked into the entryway, the hardwood floors clicking under my heels. I was not alone. Flanking me on either side were two massive, impeccably tailored private security guards. Their presence instantly drained the remaining oxygen from the room. They stood like statues, their hands clasped in front of them, their eyes scanning the family members with cold, professional detachment. Auntie Viv dropped the hands of her prayer circle, her mouth falling open. Chloe, seated next to Marcus, practically shrank into her chair, her eyes darting toward the exits. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked straight into the dining room, taking my time as I surveyed the pathetic gathering. I looked at the faces of the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had spent years nodding along to my mother's insults, the people who had cheered for Marcus while actively participating in my exclusion. "I heard you were looking for a miracle, Auntie," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence. I figured I would save you the trouble of waiting and deliver the answers directly. Marcus violently shoved his chair backward, the wooden legs screeching against the floorboards. He stood up, puffing out his chest, desperately trying to reclaim his shattered masculinity in front of the extended family who had not witnessed his pathetic collapse in the lawyer's office. His face flushed a dark, angry red. He pointed a shaking finger at my security guards. "You cannot just barge into this house, Naomi. You do not get to come in here and bully us. You think because you bought up some paper you own us. You think you are untouchable." I tilted my head, studying him. It was the exact same blustering, arrogant tone he had used 5 years ago when he bullied our parents into signing the second mortgage. I remembered standing in their kitchen begging my mother not to sign the documents Marcus had slammed on the table. He had puffed out his chest, then too loudly bragging about his high-powered lawyers on retainer, assuring our parents that his investments were bulletproof and that I was just a financially illiterate coward who did not understand how real wealth worked. He had used intimidation and fake legal jargon to strip them of their only asset. "I am not bullying you, Marcus," I replied, my tone completely flat. "I am simply auditing my investments. And currently, I am looking at a room full of bad debt. I have been speaking with my counsel all weekend," Marcus spat, stepping away from the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "We are not rolling over for this. What you did was an aggressive hostile acquisition. It is textbook predatory lending. You manipulated the system to corner me, and it is illegal. We will sue you. We will drag your companies through civil court until you are bled dry. You will not get the house, and you will not get Viv's church." Auntie Viv nodded vigorously from the head of the table, emboldened by Marcus's fake bravado. "That is right. You have enough money, Naomi. Share it with your blood, or we will take it to a judge." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply raised my right hand and snapped my fingers once. The security guard to my left stepped forward instantly. He opened his suit jacket, retrieved a thick, heavily tabbed binder, and handed it to me. I took the binder and tossed it directly onto the center of the dining table. It landed heavily, knocking over a crystal salt shaker and splashing water onto the lace tablecloth. Marcus stared at the binder, his fake confidence instantly evaporating. The red flush on his face drained away, leaving him a sickly ashen gray. "Sue me?" I asked, stepping right up to the edge of the table. "Marcus, you committed wire fraud across state lines. If you try to take me to court, the FBI will be waiting at the courthouse doors." The camera cuts to a tight focus on my hands, resting gracefully atop the thick black leather binder. My manicured fingers slowly trace the edge of the cover before I flip it open. The sharp, heavy rustle of paper cuts through the dead, suffocating silence of Auntie Viv's dining room. I look up, my gaze sweeping across the terrified faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. They are trapped in their chairs, staring at the open binder like it is a live explosive device placed directly in the center of their Sunday dinner. Let us take a detailed look at the genius financial strategy of the man of the house. I say, my voice projecting clearly and coldly across the room. Let us see exactly how Marcus managed to incinerate millions of dollars of our parents' hard-earned legacy and leverage God's house into the dirt. I turned to the first tab, sliding a bank statement out of its plastic sleeve and placing it face up on the lace tablecloth. Here we have the itemized records from 2 years ago. I begin tapping the page with my index finger. While my mother and father were refinancing their home to cover what they thought was a temporary dip in Marcus's commercial real estate portfolio, he was transferring hundreds of thousands of dollars into personal offshore checking accounts. And where did that money go? I looked directly at Chloe. It went to Dubai. First-class Emirates flights, 7-star hotel suites, and weekly exorbitant shopping sprees at the Dubai Mall. Chloe shrinks back into her chair, her face turning a sickly, translucent shade of white. The rest of the family turns to look at her, their expressions twisting from lingering shock into absolute disgust. He was not closing international property deals. I continue turning the page and pulling out a stack of credit card statements. He was funding a fake lavish luxury lifestyle so his wife could post pictures on Instagram and pretend she had married a billionaire. When the cash from the first refinance dried up, Marcus panicked. He needed liquid capital fast to keep the grand illusion going. I slide a new stack of documents across the wood, pushing them toward Uncle Ray. So he turned to cryptocurrency. He dumped the remaining equity from our parents' estate into highly volatile, unregulated offshore crypto exchanges. He was chasing a miracle return, betting the entire family legacy on digital coins that crashed to zero within weeks. He lost $1.4 million in exactly 30 days. A collective gasp ripples through the room. Uncle Ray, who had always praised Marcus's business acumen at these very dinners, slumps back in his chair, rubbing his forehead as if he is fighting off a migraine. Auntie Viv looks like she might actually vomit onto her good china. Marcus stands frozen at the end of the table, his mouth opening and closing without any sound. The aggressive bravado he had attempted to project just moments ago is entirely gone, leaving only a hollow, pathetic, sweating shell of a man. But the absolute best part of this entire tragedy? I say, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper that commands the entire room, is the marketing budget. While our parents were taking extra consulting shifts, working themselves into early graves to keep the aggressive debt collectors at bay, Marcus was spending $10,000 a month buying fake followers online. I toss a printed, itemized invoice into the center of the table. He paid click farms in Eastern Europe to inflate his social media metrics. He bought fake likes, fake comments, and fake engagement so he could parade around the internet as a self-made financial guru. He drained his own mother and father dry, stressed them until their hearts literally gave out from the burden of his hidden debts, just so he could look important to a bunch of strangers on the internet. He is not a financial genius. He is a parasite. The silence in the dining room shatters completely. The family members who had spent years treating Marcus like royalty, who had aided and abetted his entitlement while treating me like an outcast, suddenly turn on him like a pack of wolves. You took their retirement. Uncle Ray shouts, his face purple with rage, slamming his heavy fist onto the table. Your father worked for 40 years to build that estate. You stole from your own blood to buy fake followers. Auntie Viv points a trembling finger at him, tears of rage and humiliation streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. You swore to me the church funds were safe. You sat in my living room, ate my food, and swore on the Holy Bible that you were protecting the congregation. You are a monster, Marcus. You killed your parents with stress, and you tried to destroy all of us. The room erupts into a deafening cacophony of shouting. Cousins are yelling, aunts are crying out in betrayal. The entire facade of the perfect wealthy family is burning to ash in front of my eyes. Marcus backs away from the table, holding his hands up defensively, shaking his head in denial. He looks wildly around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face, but he finds nothing except absolute hatred. And then, the ultimate betrayal happens. Chloe, sensing the entire ship is plunging into the dark, freezing depths of the ocean, makes a rapid, desperate calculation. She realizes that being tied to Marcus is no longer just a social embarrassment or a financial burden. It is a one-way ticket to a federal penitentiary and lifelong poverty. She violently pushes her chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor, and leaps to her feet. She points a shaking, manicured finger directly at her husband's chest, her eyes wide and completely manic. He did it! Chloe screams over the noise of the furious family. He did it all. I told him to stop, but he would not listen to me. Marcus stares at his wife, completely blindsided, his jaw hanging slack. Chloe, what are you doing? Shut up. I will not shut up, she shrieks, turning her frantic, pleading gaze to me. Naomi, listen to me. I have proof. I have everything. I know exactly where he keeps the hidden hard drives in his office. I have proof that he forged his father's signature on the second mortgage. He signed the legal documents himself while your father was in the hospital. The room falls dead silent once again. Marcus lets out a primal yell and lunges toward her across the dining room, but my two private security guards step forward, instantly blocking his path with their massive frames. Marcus stumbles backward, terrified of the physical wall between him and his wife. Chloe grips the edge of the dining table, panting heavily, locking her desperate, tear-filled eyes onto mine. I will give it to you, Naomi, she begs, her voice cracking with sheer, unfiltered desperation. I will give you the hard drives. I will testify against him in federal court. I will give you everything you need to lock him away for the rest of his natural life. Just let me off the hook. Please, Naomi. If you forgive my portion of the debt, I will hand him to you on a silver platter. The absolute silence that followed Chloe's desperate bargain felt heavier and far more suffocating than the humid Atlanta air waiting outside. From a sharp profile angle, I simply watched her grovel. A detached, icy smirk played across my lips as the pristine, heavily curated facade of the family's most celebrated couple completely disintegrated right in front of my eyes. Chloe did not wait for my permission or for Marcus to defend himself. Her hands shook violently as she dug into her quilted Chanel purse, her manicured nails catching on the lining as she yanked out her rose gold smartphone. Her thumbs flew frantically across the cracked screen, pulling up the digital receipts that would bury the man she had sworn to love, for better or for worse. She shoved the glowing phone across the table, not caring that the spilled water from the overturned crystal glasses soaked the edge of her expensive leather case. Look at it! She demanded, her voice shrill and entirely unhinged, pointing a shaking finger at the bright screen. Look at the timestamps. Look at the PDF attachments. He sent the drafted loan agreements to his personal email, right from his father's home office computer. while his dad was in the hospital having his first stroke. He forwarded the signature blocks to a graphic designer in Eastern Europe. The exact same digital click farm guys who bought him his fake Instagram followers digitized his dad's handwriting. He stamped them on the secondary mortgage deeds and wired the cash straight into his failing crypto portfolio. I have the entire paper trail, every single email, every wire transfer receipt. He is a criminal. Marcus stared at the glowing screen of the phone, his eyes bulging out of his skull. The sheer unprecedented betrayal from his co-conspirator, his trophy wife, snapped whatever fragile thread of sanity he had left. The realization that he was totally cornered, actively betrayed by the very woman he had bankrupted his own parents to impress, triggered a primal, rabid panic deep within him. With a guttural, furious roar, Marcus lunged across the dining table. He knocked over a heavy serving platter, sending Auntie Viv's famous pot roast and dark brown gravy splashing across the imported lace tablecloth and splattering onto the floor like fresh blood. He grabbed for the phone, his large hands clawing wildly at Chloe's wrist. Chloe shrieked, a piercing sound that rattled the crystal chandelier above us. She twisted her body away, bringing her free hand down hard across his face. Her massive diamond engagement ring caught his cheek, tearing a thin, bright red scratch straight down his jawline. Marcus did not recoil. He grabbed a fistful of her expensive blonde extensions, violently yanking her backward to pry the phone from her desperate grip. Chloe kicked out her sharp stiletto heel, catching him directly in the shin as they crashed into the heavy oak dining chairs, sending them toppling to the floor in a loud, violent tangle of flailing limbs and ruined designer clothes. My two security guards instantly shifted their weight, their heavy boots stepping forward simultaneously. Their hands moved swiftly toward the restraints on their tactical belts, fully prepared to pull the thrashing, screaming couple apart. I raised my right hand, keeping my palm flat and steady. "Stand down," I commanded softly. The guards immediately froze, stepping back into their passive, neutral stances, leaving the floor wide open. I wanted this. I wanted Auntie Viv, Uncle Ray, and every single complicit, silent cousin in this room to witness the spectacular, violent implosion of their golden children. I let them watch. I let the entire family sit in paralyzed, breathless horror as the perfect, untouchable Marcus and his immaculate country club wife rolled on the wet, gravy-stained hardwood floor, tearing at each other like feral animals fighting over scraps of garbage. Auntie Viv buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably, as the myth of her prestigious nephew was literally beaten to a pulp in her own dining room. The uncles who had spent years praising Marcus's brilliant business acumen now watched him claw at his wife's hand for a smartphone, revealing the absolute pathetic cowardice underneath his tailored suit. After a solid minute of breathless, pathetic grappling, Marcus finally managed to rip the phone from Chloe's grasp. He scrambled backward like a crab, clutching the cracked device to his chest, gasping for air, his silk tie ripped half off his neck. Chloe stayed on the floor, her pink tweed jacket ruined and stained with grease, her hair a chaotic mess, dark mascara running in thick rivers down her flushed face. She looked up at me from the ground, gasping for breath, expecting me to validate her ultimate betrayal. She fully expected me to offer her a lifeline for handing him over. "I already have the emails, Chloe," I said, my voice slicing effortlessly through their heavy, desperate panting. Marcus froze, the phone slipping from his sweaty grip and clattering onto the floorboards. "I told you I cloned your backups last week." I continued, looking down at her with absolute apathy. "Your physical phone is entirely irrelevant to me, and your testimony is completely unnecessary." Chloe's eyes widened in fresh, overwhelming terror. She scrambled up to her knees, dragging herself across the ruined dining room rug, ignoring the broken crystal and spilled food, until she was right at my feet. She grabbed the hem of my skirt, her knuckles turning stark white. But I gave him up. She wept, her voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine that echoed in the quiet room. "I cooperated. You said you would let me off the hook. You have to let me go. I am giving you everything." I looked down at her tear-streaked, desperate face, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical satisfaction. "You did not hand him over out of some sudden moral awakening, Chloe. You handed him over because you got caught. You knew exactly where that money was coming from every single time you swiped that black card. You watched him forge those documents and then you happily packed your Louis Vuitton luggage and flew first class to Dubai. You drank $1,000 champagne bought with my parents' stolen retirement funds. You enjoyed every single second of the luxurious lifestyle those forged signatures bought. You are not a victim. You are an accomplice. She let out a devastated, breathless wail and fully collapsed her forehead, hitting the floor right at the tips of my leather shoes. Her entire body shook as she begged, pleading with me to spare her from the federal charges and the crushing poverty that was barreling toward her. She wept about her ruined reputation, her lost friends, her non-existent future in Buckhead. And I stared down at the top of her ruined, tangled blonde hair. I leaned forward slightly, making sure my voice carried clearly over her pathetic sobbing, delivering the final blow with absolute terrifying calm. "Remember when you told me to go back to doing hair?" I asked softly, watching her shoulders go rigid at the sudden memory of her own racist cruelty. "Well, you better learn how to braid, Chloe. You are going to need a trade." The camera pushes in slowly and steadily, gliding right through the towering wrought iron gates of the sprawling Buckhead estate. It is Monday morning, 8 o'clock on the dot. The thick Atlanta humidity has already begun to rise, but the morning dew still clings to the perfectly manicured emerald green lawns. I step out of my black SUV, the crisp morning air, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of Auntie Viv's dining room the night before. I adjust the cuffs of my tailored blazer, feeling entirely calm. I am not arriving alone. Two massive idling box trucks rumble up the long circular driveway right behind me, carrying a fully bonded professional moving crew. A marked county sheriff cruiser pulls up alongside my vehicle, its tires crunching heavily over the pristine gravel. Sheriff Davies steps out, adjusting his duty belt and tipping his hat to me. He is holding a thick stack of court-ordered eviction documents, the exact paperwork I had finalized with my legal team weeks ago. We walk up the wide marble steps together. The sheriff bangs his heavy fist against the custom mahogany double doors. The sound is deafening, demanding immediate attention. It takes 3 full minutes before the lock finally clicks. The heavy door cracks open to reveal Chloe. She is wrapped in a silk designer robe, clutching a porcelain coffee mug, her face a mask of sleep-deprived irritation. That irritation instantly morphs into sheer, unadulterated panic the second she registers the uniform standing next to me. Behind her, the grand foyer is absolutely pristine. There is not a single cardboard box in sight. Not a single roll of packing tape. Not a single piece of bubble wrap. They had genuinely believed I was bluffing. They actually thought the Sunday dinner spectacle was just a dramatic family threat, something that could be swept under the rug and forgotten by Monday morning. "What is this?" Chloe demands, her voice cracking as she steps back, instinctively pulling the silk robe tighter across her chest. Sheriff Davies steps forward, holding up the paperwork. "Ma'am, we are here to execute a court-ordered eviction. The property at this address has been fully foreclosed upon and legally transferred. You need to vacate the premises immediately." Marcus appears at the top of the sweeping curved staircase. He is wearing expensive silk pajamas, rubbing his eyes as he peers down into the foyer. When he sees me standing there with law enforcement, the remaining blood drains from his face. "Naomi, you cannot be serious!" Marcus shouts, gripping the banister as he hurries down the stairs. "It is Monday morning. We need time. You cannot just throw us out into the street. We have rights." "You had 30 days of legal notice," I reply, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling of the foyer. "The grace period expired at midnight. This house no longer belongs to you." Chloe lets out a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. She lunges forward and slams the heavy mahogany door right in our faces. The heavy deadbolt slides into place with a loud clack. Muffled through the thick wood, I can hear her screaming at Marcus, her voice raw with panic. She is demanding he do something, demanding he call his lawyers. "Call 911, Chloe shrieks through the door. "Tell them there is a hostile trespasser on our property. Tell them we are being threatened." I look at Sheriff Davies. He simply sighs, shaking his head at the absolute absurdity of the situation. and steps back to wait. Less than 10 minutes later, two local Atlanta police cruisers fly up the long driveway, their lights flashing brightly against the morning sun sirens, whooping loudly enough to wake the entire affluent neighborhood. Two patrol officers jump out of their vehicles, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts as they approach the porch. The moment they arrive, the front door swings open. Chloe throws herself onto the porch, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at me. She plays the ultimate desperate victim. "Arrest her!" Chloe cries out, forcing tears into her eyes. "She is harassing us. She brought these men here to break into my home. She is trespassing on private property." The local officers walk up the marble steps, clearly assessing the scene, but Sheriff Davies steps forward immediately. He flashes his badge and hands over the thick stack of documents. I step up beside him, handing the officers the certified deeds, the finalized foreclosure notices, and the ultimate eviction mandate signed and stamped by a federal judge. The older local officer takes a long, quiet minute to review the airtight legal paperwork. He flips through the pages, examining the seals and signatures. He lets out a slow breath, shaking his head as he turns to look at Chloe and Marcus. "Ma'am, this is not your property," the officer states flatly, handing the papers back to the sheriff. "The documentation is absolute. She owns this estate. You are the ones trespassing." Chloe's mouth falls open. She staggers backward, bumping into Marcus, who is staring at the officers in complete disbelief. The reality of their total ruin finally crashes down on them. There are no high-powered lawyers to save them. There are no extensions. There are no more lies to spin. You have exactly 15 minutes to gather your immediate personal belongings. Sheriff Davies announces, his voice booming into the grand foyer, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Clothing, basic toiletries, and daily necessities only. Anything attached to the house stays. Any high-value assets tied to the estate collateral stay. 15 minutes, or my deputies will physically remove you from the premises. Pure, unadulterated chaos erupts. Chloe lets out a guttural, furious scream and sprints up the stairs, tripping over the hem of her silk robe in her blind panic. Marcus stands paralyzed for a fraction of a second before scrambling up the steps right behind her. I step calmly over the threshold into my new home, motioning for the professional moving crew to stand by the entrance. I stand in the center of the foyer, listening to the frantic blurring of movement from the second-floor landing. Doors slam violently, drawers are ripped open and tossed onto the floor. I hear glass shattering and Chloe cursing hysterically as she realizes she cannot possibly pack her massive, sprawling designer wardrobe in 15 minutes. The absolute indignity of the golden children being placed on a ticking clock is deeply satisfying. The minutes tick down relentlessly. 14, 10, 5. "Time is up," the sheriff calls out from the base of the stairs. Marcus hurries down the sweeping staircase, struggling under the weight of two bulging, oversized designer duffel bags. He is sweating profusely, his chest heaving, his eyes darting nervously toward the front door. He is moving far too fast in his panic. His leather slipper catches the edge of the bottom marble step. He stumbles hard, his arms flailing to catch his balance. One of the heavy duffel bags slips from his sweaty grip, hitting the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. The zipper bursts open violently upon impact. Designer shirts and silk ties spill out across the floorboards, but that is not what catches my eye. A heavy velvet-lined mahogany box tumbles out of the clothes, springing open as it strikes the floor. 6 gleaming, pristine vintage Rolex watches scatter across the polished wood. The entire room goes dead silent. I stare at the watches gleaming in the morning light. It is my father's vintage collection, the exact same collection my father spent 30 years carefully curating. The exact same watches Marcus swore to our mother he had sold 3 years ago to help cover the mounting medical bills from our father's first stroke. The exact same watches Marcus swore to our mother he had sold 3 years ago to help cover the mounting medical bills from our father's first stroke. Marcus scrambled onto his knees, his hands frantically clawing at the polished hardwood floor, trying to scoop up the heavy gold and platinum timepieces before I could react. My heel came down hard, pinning the strap of my father's prized vintage Daytona against the marble threshold. Marcus froze, his trembling fingers just inches from the watch. He looked up at me, his face slick with a pathetic mixture of sweat and absolute terror. "You told her you sold them," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register that cut through the frantic, heavy breathing in the foyer. "You sat at her kitchen table, held her hand, and watched her cry because she thought her husband's most prized possessions were gone forever. You let her take on extra shifts at the bakery to pay for his medication, all while you had these sitting in a velvet box hidden in your closet." "I was going to sell them," Marcus stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine. "I was waiting for the market to appreciate. It was an investment for the family, Naomi. You have to believe me." "I do not have to believe a single word that comes out of your mouth ever again," I replied, kicking the heavy mahogany box out of his reach. "And you will not be making any more investments on behalf of this family." Right on cue, the heavy front door swung open a few inches wider. Mr. Sterling stepped out from the shadows of the porch, his signature leather briefcase clutched tightly in his hand. He looked down at Marcus groveling on the floor with an expression of profound professional disgust. He did not bother with pleasantries. He simply unclasped his briefcase and pulled out a fresh stack of legal notices, the crisp white paper contrasting sharply against the chaotic, frantic energy of the eviction. "Under Part 1 of your late father's will," Mr. Sterling stated, his voice booming with absolute legal authority, "you were granted immediate possession of all family heirlooms, including this vintage watch collection. However, as of 9 o'clock this morning, you are officially in default of over $3 million in personal and commercial loans." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting frantically between me and the lawyer. "But those loans are tied to my business accounts. You cannot touch my personal property. You cannot take my father's watches. Midas Holdings owns your business accounts, and Midas Holdings owns your personal debt," I reminded him smoothly. "And Midas Holdings is calling in every single penny. By the authority of the county court, all physical assets of value currently residing on this property are hereby seized to satisfy your outstanding balance." I gestured to the two massive security guards flanking the doorway. "Confiscate the watches," I ordered. "No," Marcus screamed, lunging forward, but the guards moved with terrifying speed. One guard easily shoved Marcus back against the wall, pinning him there with a single heavy forearm across his chest, while the other calmly bent down and collected the 6 vintage Rolexes, placing them securely back into the velvet box. At that exact moment, Chloe came stumbling down the sweeping staircase. She was dragging 2 massive, heavily monogrammed Louis Vuitton trunk suitcases, her arms overflowing with Birkin bags and Chanel garment bags. She was panting heavily, her face streaked with ruined mascara, completely oblivious to the legal execution happening at the bottom of the stairs. "I got my jewelry," she gasped, dragging the heavy trunks toward the front door. "And the bags. We can sell the bags, Marcus. They hold their value. We can get cash today." Sheriff Davies stepped squarely into her path, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Put the bags down, ma'am." Chloe stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with fresh panic. "What are you talking about? These are my personal belongings. The paper said I could take my personal belongings. Basic clothing and toiletries only." I corrected her, stepping forward and tapping the side of the nearest Louis Vuitton trunk with my manicured nail. "Every single designer item you are holding was purchased within the last 36 months. They were purchased using the funds Marcus embezzled from the New Hope Community Center and the fake offshore crypto accounts. Those bags are not your personal property, Chloe. They are stolen goods purchased with fraudulent funds. They are now officially classified as collateral assets, and they belong to Midas Holdings." Chloe let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. She clutched a bright pink Birkin bag to her chest, like a newborn child, shaking her head violently. "No. You cannot do this. You are taking everything. You are leaving us with nothing." I snapped my fingers. One of the professional movers stepped forward, snapping open 2 heavy-duty black plastic trash bags. He held them out toward Marcus and Chloe. "You have exactly 3 minutes left," I said, looking at my watch. "I suggest you run back upstairs and fill these bags with basics. Underwear, socks, jeans, and cheap t-shirts. Anything with a designer label stays. If you try to sneak so much as a diamond stud earring out of this house, I will have the sheriff arrest you both for grand larceny right here in the foyer. The absolute terrifying reality of their situation finally broke them. Chloe dropped the Birkin bag to the floor, snatching the black trash bag from the mover. She let out a hysterical, ugly sob and sprinted back up the stairs. Marcus followed her. His head hung low, completely stripped of his arrogance, his pride, and his stolen wealth. When they returned less than 3 minutes later, they looked like entirely different people. They were dressed in plain sweatpants and faded t-shirts, each clutching a half-filled garbage bag of cheap clothing. The sheriff escorted them out the front door, guiding them down the marble steps toward the driveway. Marcus reached into his pocket, his hand closing around a set of keys. "I will bring the Porsche around," he muttered to Chloe, his voice hollow and defeated. "We can drive to my mother's house." I stepped out onto the grand porch, looking down at them. "You might want to call an Uber, Marcus." He stopped, turning to look back at me. "What are you talking about?" Right on cue, 2 heavy-duty flatbed tow trucks turned off the main road and rumbled up the long gravel driveway, parking directly behind the moving vans. The drivers hopped out already, unspooling the thick steel cables to hook up to the gleaming black Porsche and the white Mercedes G-Wagon parked near the garage. "You defaulted on your secondary vehicle loans 3 months ago," I explained, watching the utter despair wash over his face. "Midas Holdings bought those titles too. You do not own the cars, you do not own the house, you do not own the watches, the bags, or the clothes. You own nothing. Now get off my property." Marcus and Chloe stood frozen on the edge of the driveway, clutching their black garbage bags completely stripped to the bone. They had nowhere to go, no money to their names, and no one left to manipulate. The sky above the sprawling Buckhead estate had been darkening all morning. A low rumble of thunder echoed in the distance, and the thick, humid air suddenly broke. Heavy, freezing drops of rain began to fall, hitting the pavement with a sharp, rhythmic slapping sound. Within seconds, the drizzle turned into a torrential downpour, exactly like the storm that had battered the cemetery on the day of my father's funeral. Chloe shrieked as the freezing rain soaked through her cheap t-shirt, her ruined blonde hair plastering to her face. Marcus simply stood there, letting the storm wash over him, too broken to even seek shelter. One of my security guards stepped out of the foyer, handing me a crystal goblet filled with expensive red wine. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I leaned casually against the massive white column of the porch, perfectly sheltered from the storm. I held the glass exactly the way Chloe had held hers on the day she laughed at my grief, mirroring her exact careless pose. I watched them shiver in the freezing rain, offering absolutely no mercy as the tow trucks hauled their stolen luxury away into the gray, unforgiving morning. Wide shot. I leaned back against the plush leather of my custom executive chair, slowly shaking my head at the absolute absurdity playing out on my computer monitor. It has been exactly 1 week since I stood on the porch of my newly reclaimed Buckhead estate, watching Marcus and Chloe shiver in the freezing rain, while tow trucks hauled their stolen luxury vehicles away. A normal, rational human being would have used this past week to find a cheap apartment, secure a minimum wage job, and prepare for the massive legal fallout that is undoubtedly coming their way. But Marcus is not a rational human being. He is a pure narcissist who has been violently backed into a corner, and a cornered narcissist only knows how to do one thing: play the victim. Instead of finding honest work, Marcus has spent the last 7 days orchestrating a desperate, pathetic smear campaign. He has been hitting up every local Black-owned media outlet in Atlanta, pitching himself as a tragic martyr. He is painting himself as a hardworking community entrepreneur who was viciously crushed by the ruthless, predatory machinery of corporate America. He is specifically targeting Midas Holdings, branding me as a vulture capitalist. He is literally going on community radio stations and claiming that my firm is actively destroying Black generational wealth and aggressively gentrifying historic neighborhoods. The staggering hypocrisy of a man who bankrupted his own parents to fund his trophy wife's Dubai shopping sprees, suddenly masquerading as a champion of Black wealth, is almost funny. His sheer desperation has finally landed him a spot on the biggest platform yet. He is currently sitting live in the studio of the Culture Check, Atlanta's most prominent and highly viewed urban business podcast. Hosted by a heavy-hitting media personality named Dre, the show broadcasts live from a sleek neon-lit studio to over 100,000 viewers on YouTube and Twitch. I am watching the live feed on the massive flat screen mounted on my office wall, sipping a fresh cup of espresso. Marcus certainly looks the part. He has deliberately styled himself to appear humbled, exhausted, and deeply wounded. He has abandoned his usual tailored Tom Ford suits for a plain, slightly wrinkled button-down shirt. His hair is intentionally unkempt. He leans close to the expensive studio microphone, his posture slumped. His voice thick with manufactured emotion. Dre sits across the soundboard, nodding sympathetically as Marcus spins a web of completely fabricated, highly damaging lies. "It is a tragedy," Dre Marcus says, shaking his head and actively trying to squeeze a fake tear from his completely dry eyes. "I spent my entire adult life trying to build up our family legacy. I was holding down the fort, protecting my father's business while he was in the hospital fighting for his life after a stroke. But my sister Naomi, she changed. She got a taste of corporate power, and she sold out her own blood. She manipulated our dying parents when their minds were weak. She legally maneuvered me out of the company I built with my own two hands. And then she used her vulture capital firm to illegally seize my home and my personal assets. She is coming into our neighborhoods, destroying our legacies, all to build her massive corporate empire." The live chat scrolling rapidly on the right side of my screen is going absolutely wild. Viewers are outraged. They are calling for immediate boycotts of Midas Holdings. They are calling me a sellout, a predator, and a disgrace to the community. Marcus sits there, soaking up the misplaced sympathy, looking directly into the camera with a wounded, earnest expression. He genuinely thinks he is winning. He actually believes he can weaponize public outrage to force my hand and secure a financial settlement. I place my espresso cup gently onto my mahogany desk. I do not get angry. I get proactive. I press the silver intercom button, connecting me to my lead corporate attorney, Mr. Sterling, who is stationed right outside my office doors. "Send it," I command simply. "We have been preparing for this exact moment all week." Midas Holdings does not engage in public mudslinging or internet drama, but we do deal in absolute, irrefutable facts. A direct email is instantly routed straight to Dre's personal and studio inbox. The subject line is flagged as an urgent legal notice and verified financial disclosures. It contains a formal binding cease and desist order regarding the live defamation of Midas Holdings. But far more importantly, it contains the receipts. Attached to the email is an airtight, undeniable package of total financial ruin. There are the exact verified bank records showing Marcus draining our father's business accounts. There are the wire transfer logs sending hundreds of thousands of dollars directly into volatile offshore crypto wallets. There are the forged signature documents complete with verification from independent forensic experts. There are the side-by-side comparisons of the exact dates our father was sitting in the intensive care unit, placed right next to the time-stamped receipts for Chloe's diamond jewelry and first-class flights to the Emirates. On the screen, Marcus is still talking, leaning into the microphone, and delivering his final pathetic plea for community support. "We have to stand together against people like her," Dre Marcus says solemnly, his voice trembling perfectly. "People who tear down their own families for $1. We have to protect our own." Dre opens his mouth to agree with the sentiment, but a loud, sharp notification ping echoes clearly through the studio audio. Dre glances down at the glowing screen of his open laptop. He clicks the email. I watch closely as the entire atmosphere in the studio shifts in a fraction of a second. The sympathetic, supportive expression on Dre's face completely vanishes. The color drains from his cheeks. His eyes widen in genuine, unfiltered shock as he scrolls rapidly through the attached PDF files, viewing the undeniable proof of Marcus's staggering crimes. Marcus is still rambling about family values, totally oblivious to the digital bomb that has just detonated across the table. Dre holds up a flat palm, cutting Marcus off mid-sentence. The host stares at the screen, blinking hard, clearly, struggling to process the massive scale of the fraud in front of him. He finally looks up at the man sitting across from him. Marcus Dre says, his voice dropping into a dead serious register that instantly silences the studio. "We just received a live cease and desist along with the actual financial records." Dre's eyes remain glued to the monitor, his face completely devoid of the sympathetic warmth he had been projecting just seconds ago. The silence in the studio stretches out heavy and suffocating. Marcus shifts uncomfortably in his seat, the leather squeaking against his sudden nervous movement. He forces a tight, dismissive laugh, waving his hand as if he can physically swat the words out of the air. "Draman, do not tell me you are falling for her corporate intimidation tactics," Marcus says, his voice pitching slightly higher than normal. "She has bottomless pockets. Her lawyers manufacture fake documents all the time to scare people into silence. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She is trying to silence a black entrepreneur." Dre does not look up. His hand moves the mouse, clicking open a secondary attachment. Marcus Dre says, his voice flat, dangerously calm. "There is an audio file here. The sender explicitly states it was provided directly by your wife, Chloe. Should I play it?" Marcus freezes. The manufactured indignation evaporates from his face, replaced by a sudden, sickening dread. He reaches across the console, his hands panicked. "Do not play that. It is manipulated. It is completely generated by artificial intelligence. You cannot play unverified audio on a live broadcast, Dre. That is a massive legal liability. You will lose your show." The email states it has already been forensically authenticated and filed as hard evidence in federal court. Dre replies, his finger hovering over the mouse. "And since you just spent the last 20 minutes on my platform accusing your sister of elder abuse and corporate theft, I think my audience deserves to hear the full context." Dre clicks play. The studio monitors instantly crackle to life. The audio is incredibly clear, a high-quality recording captured directly from a smartphone. The voice that fills the soundproof room is undeniably Marcus. It is not the humbled, wounded victim currently sitting in the chair. It is the arrogant, sneering narcissist who believed he was completely untouchable. "She is not going to notice a thing," Marcus's recorded voice boasts, the sound of ice clinking against a heavy crystal whiskey glass echoing in the background. The old man can barely hold a pen, let alone read a bank statement. "I had the graphic designers in Belarus duplicate the signature block perfectly. I diverted the secondary mortgage funds straight into the Cayman wallets. Naomi is too busy playing venture capitalist to check the family ledgers. By the time anyone figures out the equity is completely gone, the crypto market will bounce back, and I will be 50 feet above them on a yacht." Chloe's voice chimes in on the recording, nervous but entirely complicit. "What if the bank audits the transfer? What about the medical bills? We need to keep the nurses paid so they do not ask questions. Let Naomi pay the medical bills." The recorded. Marcus laughs, a cruel, soulless sound that reverberates through the live broadcast. "I am building a real empire here. The old man is a dinosaur. I am just accelerating his retirement." The audio stops. The silence that follows is absolute. I watch the live feed on my office screen, leaning forward in my executive chair, resting my chin on my folded hands. The chat interface on the right side of the broadcast practically explodes. The scrolling text becomes a furious, illegible blur of righteous anger. The exact same viewers who were pledging their undying support just 5 minutes ago are now actively tearing him to shreds. They call him a fraud, a parasite, a pathetic excuse for a man who robbed his own dying father. They ruthlessly mock his wrinkled shirt, exposing his fake, humble aesthetic for the manipulative, carefully constructed costume it really is. The community he tried to weaponize has instantly, violently turned against him. Dre slowly takes off his professional studio headphones, resting them heavily on the soundboard. He looks at Marcus with a mixture of profound disgust and cold fury. "You came onto my platform," Dre says, his voice dripping with absolute contempt, "and you used my community to try and scam your sister after you robbed your own sick father blind. You are exactly what is wrong with our culture. Get out of my studio." Marcus is actively hyperventilating. His eyes dart around the soundproof room like a trapped rat desperately looking for an exit. The charismatic entrepreneur facade is completely destroyed. He rips the microphone off his collar, the fabric of his shirt tearing loudly in the quiet room. He does not offer an apology. He does not attempt to explain or defend himself. He simply scrambles out of his chair, nearly knocking over the heavy metal mic stand, and bolts for the studio door. "Get that camera out of my face," Marcus snarls, swatting blindly at the robotic tracking lens as he violently retreats. He slams the heavy soundproof studio door open and bursts out into the modern glass-walled lobby of the broadcasting building. He is panting heavily, his chest heaving as he expects to find a mob of local reporters or perhaps my private security detail waiting to confront him. He genuinely thinks the public humiliation he just endured is the worst thing that will happen to him today. He is completely wrong. Standing calmly in the center of the pristine marble lobby are two individuals. They are not carrying microphones or cameras. They are wearing sharp, nondescript dark suits. Their posture is rigid professional and completely unyielding. As Marcus stumbles to a halt, breathless and cornered, the taller of the two men reaches into his breast pocket. He flips open a leather wallet, revealing a gleaming gold badge. "Marcus Wilson," the agent says, his voice echoing sharply across the polished floors of the lobby. "We are with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your immediate arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, and interstate embezzlement. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The camera pulls in close, settling into a tight, unforgiving frame directly on my face. The detached, icy smirk that had carried me through the morning has completely vanished. There is no more smiling. Absolute clinical seriousness settles over my features as I watch the chaotic live feed of the podcast studio abruptly cut to black. The digital execution is finished. Marcus truly believed I had orchestrated some grand cinematic plot to sick the federal government on him. He gave me entirely too much credit. I did not make a single phone call to the authorities. I did not have to lift a finger to alert the Justice Department. Marcus did that entirely by himself. Midas Holdings is a massive, heavily regulated financial institution. We operate under strict Tier 1 federal compliance mandates. When Marcus arrogantly transferred the stolen equity out of my father's business accounts, he crossed state lines. When he routed those heavily monitored funds through a network of shell companies and dumped them into volatile offshore crypto wallets in the Cayman Islands, he crossed international borders. The absolute second that cross-collateralized money hit a foreign server, my firm's automated compliance algorithms woke up. The software did exactly what it was programmed to do. It detected the massive irregular international transfers. It flagged the accounts, it compiled the digital routing numbers, and it automatically generated suspicious activity reports. Those reports were transmitted instantaneously to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Marcus literally triggered his own federal wire fraud investigation. His sheer, unadulterated greed bypassed human intervention entirely. He handed the federal government a smoking gun, wrapped in a neat digital bow. Federal wire fraud and interstate embezzlement charges carry a 97% conviction rate. Chloe did not need a law degree to understand those mathematical odds. The moment the news of Marcus being paraded out of the podcast studio in handcuffs hit the local blogs, Chloe sprang into action with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. She did not shed a single tear for her husband. She did not call his parents to offer comfort. She did not try to scrape together money for a defense attorney. Instead, she marched directly into the United States Attorney's Office in downtown Atlanta, flanked by a public defender she had managed to charm into taking her case pro bono. Before Marcus had even been fully processed and fingerprinted in federal holding, his loyal, loving wife flipped on him. Chloe signed a comprehensive ironclad federal cooperation agreement. She turned state's witness without a second of hesitation. To secure her own blanket immunity, she handed the federal prosecutors absolutely everything. She gave them the encrypted hard drives. She gave them the passwords to the hidden email accounts. She surrendered the exact timeline of the forgery scheme, explicitly detailing how Marcus had communicated with the graphic designers in Belarus to replicate our father's signature. She traded her husband's entire future for a guarantee that she would never have to wear an orange jumpsuit. Then she delivered the final spectacular blow. Chloe did not even have the decency to break the news of her ultimate betrayal to Marcus herself. As Marcus sat shivering in a cold concrete holding cell, awaiting his arraignment, a heavily guarded heavy steel door clanked open. A federal guard escorted a court-appointed process server directly into the room. The server handed Marcus a thick manila envelope. Marcus tore it open with shaking hands, desperate for a lifeline, only to find finalized divorce papers. Chloe was officially severing all legal ties, abandoning the sinking ship she had helped drill holes into, and leaving him to drown alone. 48 hours later, the heavy silence of my executive office is absolute. The Atlanta city skyline glows brightly through my floor-to-ceiling windows, a sprawling grid of lights entirely oblivious to the total destruction of the Wilson family's golden child. The sharp, jarring ring of my private, unlisted desk phone shatters the quiet. I do not move immediately. I stare at the blinking green light on the console. Only 3 people in the world have this direct number, and 2 of them are currently standing outside my office door. I reach forward, pressing the speaker button. "You have a prepaid call from an inmate at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary," an automated robotic voice announces, filling the large, quiet room. "This call is subject to recording and monitoring. Do you accept the charges?" I press the number 1 on the keypad. I lean back in my chair, keeping my expression perfectly still. "Naomi," a voice croaks through the static of the line. It is Marcus. But the voice is entirely unrecognizable. The booming, arrogant baritone of the self-proclaimed corporate visionary is completely gone. In its place is a weak, trembling, pathetic rasp. He sounds small. He sounds exactly like the terrified, cornered coward he has always been, underneath the expensive suits and the stolen watches. "Please do not hang up." Marcus begs, the audio crackling violently as he speaks too closely into the receiver. "Please, Naomi, you have to help me." I remain completely silent, letting the dead air stretch out between us, forcing him to sit in the suffocating reality of his situation. "I am begging you," he cries out. The sound of his weeping echoes through the speaker. He is actually crying. Real heavy gasping sobs tear through his throat. The great Marcus Wilson, the untouchable prodigy who felt completely justified in bankrupting our parents and stealing my inheritance, is hyperventilating into a jailhouse telephone. "They are keeping me in maximum security holding," he weeps, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "It is freezing. The food is rotten. The guards look at me like I am an animal. Chloe left me Naomi. She took the immunity deal, and she served me with divorce papers right here in the cell. I have absolutely nothing. My accounts are frozen. The public defender says the feds have enough evidence to put me away for 20 years. 20 years, Naomi. My life is over." I listen to the rhythm of his frantic, terrified breathing. I feel no pity. I feel no familial obligation. I feel absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical sense of finality. "You are my little sister," Marcus pleads, utilizing his absolute last resort, weaponizing our shared childhood in a final, desperate bid for salvation. I know I messed up. I know I did terrible things. But we are blood. Mom and Dad would not want this. They would not want to see me locked in a cage. Please, Naomi. You have the capital. You have the lawyers. You are the only one who can pay the federal bail. You are the only one who can save me. I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever you want. Just please, little sister, bail me out." The silence in my office is absolute, broken only by the pathetic, ragged sound of Marcus gasping for air on the other end of the line. The camera glides smoothly across the polished mahogany of my desk, framing my face in a tight, unforgiving shot. I do not smile. I do not gloat. I simply reach out my manicured fingers, wrapping around the stem of a crystal goblet filled with a vintage Bordeaux. I poured the moment the arrest hit the newswire. I take a slow, elegant sip, letting the complex, dark notes wash over my palate while my brother hyperventilates in a federal holding cell. I do not yell. I do not raise my voice to match his frantic, terrified energy. When I finally speak, my tone is a lethal, quiet whisper that cuts through his sobbing like a freshly sharpened scalpel. You spent my entire adult life telling me that I was a burden, I say softly. You sat at family dinners and mocked my ambitions. You stole my inheritance, bankrupted our father, and when I finally confronted you, you told me I needed to learn independence. Marcus lets out a choked, desperate sound, trying to interrupt to spin one final manipulation, but my voice glides right over him. Now is your chance to learn it, I state perfectly calmly. I press the red button on the console. The line goes dead with a sharp click. Without missing a beat, I access the block feature on the secure network, ensuring that his inmate ID and the penitentiary's automated system can never connect to my firm or my personal lines ever again. Marcus is completely, irreversibly erased from my world. He is a ghost locked inside a concrete box of his own making. With the parasite finally excised, the real work begins. The sprawling Buckhead estate, the architectural monstrosity that Marcus and Chloe had transformed into a tacky monument to their stolen wealth, undergoes an immediate and brutal cleansing. I hire the finest demolition and design crews in Atlanta. We completely gut the interior. We tear out the gaudy gold fixtures, the imported Italian marble that Chloe bought with my father's medical funds, and the ridiculous mirrored ceilings. We strip the house down to its bare structural bones and rebuild it into something that actually matters. But I do not move into the estate. I have my own penthouse, my own life, and my own sanctuary. I refuse to sleep in a space tainted by their history. Instead, I repurpose the massive property entirely. 6 months later, the towering iron gates of the estate swing open to reveal the brand new headquarters of the Vanguard Initiative. It is a fully funded, multi-million-dollar philanthropic foundation backed entirely by Midas Holdings. The sweeping grand ballroom where Marcus used to host his fake networking events is now a state-of-the-art financial literacy center. The expansive guest wings have been converted into luxury transitional housing. The Vanguard Initiative has a very specific, fiercely guarded mission. We provide direct business grants, high-level mentorship, and immediate housing security to young Black women who have been financially alienated, emotionally abused, or cast out by their own families. It is a sanctuary for the scapegoats, the forgotten daughters, and the women who were told they would never amount to anything by the very people who were supposed to protect them. We take them in, we teach them how to build absolute financial autonomy, and we turn them into titans. The grand opening of the foundation is the social event of the year. The estate grounds are immaculate, transformed into a sweeping venue filled with prominent community leaders, legitimate investors, and the brilliant young women whose lives are already being changed by the programs. A string quartet plays softly on the manicured lawn while waiters circulate with champagne. It is the ultimate triumph. And exactly as I predicted, the vultures try to circle one last time. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main hall, I watch the security monitors linked to the front gate. A familiar fleet of mid-range luxury cars pulls up to the reinforced entry point. Auntie Viv steps out of the lead vehicle, dressed in a flamboyant church suit, looking utterly ridiculous. Behind her emerge the rest of the flying monkeys. The cousins, the enablers, the passive-aggressive relatives who watched Marcus steal from me and applauded him for his business acumen. They are the exact same people who liked his fake podcast clips just a few months ago. Now that Marcus is facing a federal prison sentence, and I am standing on the cover of national business magazines, they have miraculously changed their tune. They have shown up uninvited to my private event, expecting to walk through the gates, drink my expensive champagne, and take smiling photos for their social media to prove they are closely associated with a billionaire philanthropist. They honestly believe the concept of blood gives them an all-access pass to the empire I built, while they tried to destroy me. I tap the earpiece, linking me directly to the head of my private security detail stationed at the gate. Turn them away, I order, my voice as cool as the evening breeze. On the high-definition monitors, I watch the beautifully synchronized execution of my command. The head of security, a massive, imposing man in a tailored dark suit, steps directly into Auntie Viv's path. She immediately puffs up her chest, pointing a finger at the camera and loudly announcing that she is my blood relative, that she is family, and that she demands to be let in to celebrate her niece. The security chief does not flinch. He crosses his arms over his chest. He leans down slightly, delivering the message with absolute, unwavering authority. He informs them that their names are not on the guest list, that they have zero clearance to enter the property, and that if they do not return to their vehicles and vacate the private road immediately, they will be arrested for criminal trespassing. Auntie Viv's mouth drops open in sheer, unadulterated shock. The entire group of relatives stands frozen on the asphalt, completely humiliated. They look past the heavy iron bars, staring up at the gleaming, magnificent estate that is filled with joy, wealth, and success. A success they will never be allowed to touch. I take another sip of my wine, watching them slowly, bitterly turn around and retreat to their cars. They are officially locked out of my kingdom, forever left to fade into absolute obscurity while I build a legacy that will outlast us all. The dust has finally settled over the ruins of Marcus's fabricated empire. The frantic, desperate noise of his spectacular downfall has faded into a quiet, profound peace. Marcus ultimately pleaded down to a 5-year federal sentence, a forced compromise to avoid the terrifying 20 years the prosecutors had initially threatened. He traded his sprawling mahogany office for an 8x10 concrete cell in a medium-security facility in Florida. The man who used to boast about his offshore crypto portfolios and aggressive venture capital acquisitions now earns 40 cents an hour folding damp, scratchy bedsheets in the penitentiary laundry room. His custom-tailored Tom Ford suits have been replaced by stiff, standard-issue khaki. His relentless need for an audience, his desperate craving to be the smartest, most important man in the room, is now met only by the indifferent, hardened stares of inmates who do not care about his fabricated legacy. He has no microphone, no leverage, and no unearned wealth to hide behind. He is simply a number in the federal system, stripped down to the cowardly reality he spent his entire life trying to outrun. Chloe's ruthless scramble for immunity kept her out of a federal jumpsuit, but it completely obliterated the high society lifestyle she was willing to commit fraud to maintain. As part of her binding cooperation agreement, she was forced to surrender every single asset purchased with stolen funds. The bright pink Birkin bags, the Cartier bracelets, the designer luggage, and the diamond earrings were all seized, cataloged, and auctioned off by the federal government. Today, Chloe resides in a cramped, poorly insulated 2-bedroom apartment in a dreary gray suburb in Ohio. The woman who once threw champagne flutes at my father's funeral, who laughed at my grief while wearing stolen diamonds, now works the morning shift at a regional fast food chain. She spends her days wearing a stiff polyester uniform, her hair smelling perpetually of fryer grease, handing out paper bags of heavily salted fries to people who do not know or care about her former zip code. Her survival instinct kept her out of prison, but it condemned her to the exact mediocre, anonymous life she considered beneath her. As for Auntie Viv and the rest of the toxic extended relatives who stood silently by while Marcus robbed our parents, they have been completely surgically excised from my existence. I changed my personal numbers, restructured my digital footprint, and instructed my elite legal team to issue automatic binding, cease and desist orders to any blood relative who attempts to contact me, my firm, or my foundation. They are trapped in their own bitter, stagnant echo chamber. They complain to anyone who will listen about the ungrateful niece who abandoned them, entirely oblivious to the fact that their permanent absence is the greatest luxury I have ever afforded myself. My life is no longer defined by the exhausting, chaotic demands of people who view my success as their personal ATM. The Vanguard Initiative has exploded beyond my initial ambitious vision. The Buckhead estate is constantly humming with the brilliant, vibrant energy of young Black women who are learning how to build their own untouchable empires, unburdened by the parasitic expectations of toxic family members. I am surrounded by a chosen family of fiercely intelligent, deeply loyal women, board members, corporate mentors, and visionary peers who celebrate my victories without calculating how they can profit from them. We hold each other accountable, we relentlessly protect each other's peace, and we build generational wealth that will never be siphoned off by entitled mediocre sons. The camera stops moving. It locks into a dead center, intimate close-up of my face. The absolute seriousness of the moment settles over my features, replacing the quiet satisfaction with a cold, unwavering intensity. I look directly through the lens. Society loves to romanticize the strong black woman. They print it on t-shirts, they put it in viral hashtags, and they applaud us for our miraculous, agonizing ability to survive unimaginable stress. But the truth is, that title is a trap. It is a carefully constructed cultural cage. Families weaponize that exact trope to abuse and exhaust their daughters while endlessly coddling their sons. They expect us to be the eternal mules for the family's dysfunction. We are expected to carry the heavy financial burdens, swallow the daily emotional abuse, and silently clean up the catastrophic, reckless messes made by the men in our bloodline, all while being told to smile and be grateful for the opportunity to serve. They tell us that family is absolutely everything, manipulating our loyalty, so that we never realize we are the ones paying the entire bill for a feast we are not even allowed to eat. For years, I bought into the lie that enduring their disrespect was the price of admission for a family's love. I allowed them to shrink me, to diminish my accomplishments, and to feed my resources to a brother who viewed my hard work as his personal inheritance. But the moment I stopped performing my assigned role, the moment I demanded accountability instead of offering blind submission, the entire illusion shattered. You do not owe your life, your capital, or your sanity to people who only value you for what they can extract from you. Blood does not mandate blind loyalty, and shared DNA is not a license for financial and emotional theft. Revenge isn't about matching their loud, chaotic energy. It's about letting them dig their own graves with their arrogance while you quietly buy the deed to the cemetery. Never let anyone tell you that being the black sheep is a curse. It just means you aren't part of the slaughter.